Do the Denver Nuggets have an even clearer path to an NBA Finals appearance with a recent shakeup to a Western Conference contender? Which Nuggets newcomer intrigues you the most about their potential impact on the 2025 season? And could the winningest coach in franchise history for Denver soon be returning to an NBA sideline? All things to come on today's rundown, but we begin with a shout out to our friends at Denver Regenerative Medicine. Guys, if weight loss has been a struggle for you, it's time for something real. At Denver Regenerative Medicine, they use full-strength GLP-1 medications with doctor oversight. You can start today with a free consultation and get real results for under $300 a month. Book now at denverregen.com. It is going to be a big week leading up to Broncos coverage, with the Broncos set to take the Bengals on in primetime on Monday night. But we have some bigger news in the NBA that potentially significantly impacts the Denver Nuggets, who will have their media day, ironically, on the same Monday that the Broncos will take on the Bengals here at Empower Field. So if we're going to talk Nuggets, that means we would be remiss not to bring in our Denver Nuggets analyst to the stars, Jake Shapiro from DenverSports.com. Jake, welcome in. How are you, man?
I'm good. I'm happy to be talking ball again. We're about a month away from meaningful basketball. I don't know if people realize that.
It's crazy how quick it sneaks up.
Oh my God, there's going to be like preseason games in like a week and a half.
Yeah, no, and it's especially, I think, kind of crept up on people because of the anticipation that came as a result of the flurry of offseason moves that we saw the Denver Nuggets make, which was something that under the previous regime with Calvin Booth and Michael Malone, we were kind of beaten into submission that just wasn't possible. That wasn't the best way forward. And now the co-executive vice presidents of Ben Tenzer and Jonathan Wallace, they kick down the doors at Ball Arena and they're gunslinging. They're going and bringing back Bruce Brown. They signed Tim Hardaway Jr. They trade for Jonas Valanciunas. They trade Michael Porter Jr. for Cam Johnson. So many moving parts and pieces to this Nuggets roster. And it's happening, I think, importantly, during the offseason, unlike the Avalanche, who did all that wheeling and dealing at the trade deadline during the season, and we're kind of picking guys up onto a moving locomotive. So, Jake, as we are entering the first full season at head coach for David Adelman, the interim tag has been removed, and we now are going to get the first full taste of the David Adelman era. What are your expectations as far as the transition and the changing of guard that's taking place, going away from Michael Malone into David Adelman's tenure, and what it could mean for the Nuggets title window as it continues to hopefully stay open?
Yeah, I think the first thing is it's going to be different. Like, this is the biggest change within the Nuggets in the last 10 years. We've seen Malone and Jokic have this cooperation for such a long time, and now it's going to be a different voice atop the Nuggets leading them into battle. And for me, what I've noticed, at least in the game-to-game spurts and in David Adelman's time as an interim head coach, is that the offense is more dynamic. And I would like to see now what that looks like, given a full offseason of him and his playbook and him instituting play calls, and what that looks like. They've brought together a very interesting coaching staff with JJ Barea, Rodney Billups, and a couple other really big name guys that are really smart basketball minds. And this is probably the best coaching staff as a whole the Nuggets have had in quite a while. They have not spent money historically on assistants, and they did this offseason. So they're going to have a different approach to everything they do this year than they did last year. So things are going to be different. So I'm not sure what to expect exactly. We're going to find out on Monday, but we know from what David Adelman has said already and what he's done already, a more dynamic offense and, more trust in the young guys and playing a deeper rotation throughout the course of the regular season.
What is a more dynamic offense look like then, Jake, for David? What is David Adelman getting at when he's talking about being more dynamic? Is it a higher volume of three-point shooting? Is it better and more spacing and ball movement, a focus on interior in the paint? What does a more dynamic offense look like compared to what we saw last year with the majority of Michael Malone and then the finish with David Adelman?
So the Nuggets shot the fewest three-pointers in the NBA last year.
Correct.
That's not going to happen this year. Like, they will not allow that to happen. They will shoot more three-pointers. Just naturally, because Nikola Jokic is your best player, he's a center, and he's one of the best paint scorers ever, they're not going to be in the top 10 of three-point shooting. I'd be stunned if they were. I mean, they could be. I'd be stunned.
We're not talking Boston Celtics level volume.
Yeah, they're going to be somewhere probably between 24 and 15, if I had to guess. Like, they're not going to be atrocious at getting them up. It's going to be more of a threat, but it's not going to be something that is the biggest part of the game plan, at least in my opinion. What I've noticed, at least when David Adelman is the coach, is they are more frequently running plays. They're not into sets. So in the NBA, and most people don't really realize this, there actually are plays being run quite frequently. They're just not running as hard as possible because that would be crazy to do for 82 games over the course of 5 months, 6 months, and continuously for 40 minutes, 48 minutes a night. So they're running plays consistently. The thing is, most of their plays are called sets, and sets are a set rules of, if this guy's here, he does this. And if this guy doesn't pass the ball here, he does this now. So when that happens, the Nuggets are often running sets around Nikola Jokic, obviously, and they have all sorts of rules, and they run screens around him. They run flares. They run, cuts and all sorts of different things. But when David Adelman has been the coach, they have very specific things they're doing. They're not necessarily running sets. They're going, hey, on this play, Nikola Jokic is going to receive 2 different screens. And when that screen occurs, one guy's going to pop to the three-point line and one guy's going to go down into the paint, and it's going to create all sorts of confusion. That play is called a Spain pick and roll. Michael Malone did not run many Spain pick and rolls. David Adelman has run a lot of Spain pick and rolls, and it's one of the biggest plays in basketball that has taken over the NBA in the last 5 years. Basically, you screen the screener, which sounds crazy to do, but it creates all sorts of confusion. Instead of 2 guys involved in a pick and roll, it's 3 guys involved in a pick and roll. And guess what? The Nuggets have 3 awesome players: Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic, and Jamal Murray. And they were doing this with Aaron Gordon and Michael Porter Jr. last year at times when David Adelman was behind the bench, and it created all sorts of more confusion with the defenses and all sorts of more options Nikola Jokic, one of the greatest passers of all time, could give the ball to. So we're going to see more stuff like that where the Nuggets are more on top of things because Michael Malone's an old school coach. David Adelman is also the son of a coach, but I think he's a little bit more new school than Michael Malone.
Would you say it's that commitment to a new school mentality and maybe a little bit more deliberate focus on running plays and not getting so bogged down in just running sets is one of the main things that David Adelman does differently? And I say differently because better or worse is very subjective, and we'll see, there's still data to be collected there. But is that something that David Adelman, you think, approaches and does differently than Michael Malone that gives you optimism that this can have success going forward?
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind, Richie, the Nuggets were a decent offensive team early on in Nikola Jokic's tenure here at the Nuggets. David Adelman comes in as the offensive coordinator, and they become the greatest offense in the NBA and one of the best offenses of all time. And Nikola Jokic turns into the greatest offensive player of all time. David Adelman was Ben Johnson to Michael Malone's Matt Campbell. That is some way to think of this, right? And Michael Malone is that old school head coach. And, apparently his message had just worn thin over time. And that happens after a decade of leading the same group of people. David Adelman, I think, is talking to these guys now as colleagues rather than Michael Malone as the teacher to the students. Because guess what? Jamal Murray's a father. Aaron Gordon's in his 30s. Nikola Jokic has 2 kids now. These guys are at a different stage in their life than they were when Michael Malone took over as the head coach 10 years ago. And that voice that Michael Malone had did not change necessarily. It's hard to change the power dynamics of a relationship. David Adelman can come in and approach this from a whole different direction. I'm not saying it's going to be better or worse. Like you said, Richie, it's going to be different. And I think that's what's the most interesting part to see throughout the course of this regular season is, how does he manage Nikola Jokic? We've gotten so accustomed to Nikola Jokic's rotation where he doesn't come out of the game until the end of the third quarter. Then he comes back with about 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. And we're all, holding our pants and we're like, oh my God, you got to get Nikola back in there. You got to get Nikola back in there. I don't know. Does Nikola play the entire fourth quarter now and take a bigger rest in the third quarter? All these things we've grown so accustomed to with the Nuggets and what they do and how they operate. Those are all back to the drawing board, and you can change any of those things because there are new people in charge and there are new people in part of the rotation. The Nuggets have changed a lot of their players that they're going to use this year.
I love the comparison of Ben Johnson to Michael Malone's Dan Campbell, because, and then the last thing I want to touch on here
Did I get
before
my
we
Dan
shift
and Matt
gears.
Campbell confused? Did I
You
do my
did,
Chicago?
but
Oh,
I knew
man.
what you were
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
at. I knew what you were getting at. But I want to stick with that analogy before we shift gears to some of the newcomers on the roster and the rotation that you mentioned, because I don't know if I would go out and say that Michael Malone was biting any kneecaps with his most recent interview on SiriusXM, but he did make some comments that I think were interpreted here locally that maybe as a little bit of shade, or perhaps maybe shirking some of the responsibility for a situation that he was a part of. During an interview with SiriusXM, Michael Malone said, quote, "In my heart, I'm a coach. I'm the son of a coach, and coaching is definitely something I'd like to get back in. I still have a bad taste in my mouth with how things ended in Denver, and I'd love to go out on my own terms. With that being said, what I've learned over my many years in this league is how important it is to go to work every day with people you care about, you trust, you respect, and that are all pulling in the same direction." Jake, when I hear and read those comments from Michael Malone, who, by the way, I thought did a pretty good job with his ESPN NBA Countdown TV appearances, and I definitely think that's something that fits his personality. He's always been a little snarky. He's always been, kind of a bigger personality in that regard. When I hear and I read those comments, there's a part of me that understands it and says, yeah, I can understand how you're the winningest head coach in a franchise's history. You brought them their first and only championship, helped bring them alongside Nikola Jokic. And they fire you with 3 games left in a regular season in a way that you certainly wanted to have finished that out. But there's also a part of me when he talks about going to work and having the environment where you trust and you respect and you're all moving in the same direction. There's a part of me that's kind of feels like he may be taking the 30,000-foot view of the toxic dynamic that was in the Nuggets front office and kind of saying, well, that really wasn't because of me, when in reality, he was 50% of the blood feud with him and Calvin Booth. What say you on your reaction to those comments?
The 30,000-foot view when he's 30,000 feet in the air, staring the plane, right? Like,
Yeah.
come on. I actually agree with a lot of what Michael Malone said, because I've been on Michael Malone's side
Yep.
on most of this the whole time.
Yep.
He was coaching the greatest player in the world. He gets robbed of that opportunity to perhaps, get another championship under his belt because of the GM at the time wants to create this toxic situation where he wants to throw a bunch of rookies into the fire. It was insane that this happened just a couple months ago. And this is something that we covered here in Denver Sports. But Mike Malone was the greatest coach the Denver Nuggets ever had. His voice wore thin. That is indisputable. Who created that environment? Well, Michael Malone is definitely co-responsible for creating that environment that led to all of the bad things. But if you want to look at whose voice was right in all of these things, it's Michael Malone. He was the correct one about everything that happened. The only thing I disagree with on Michael Malone is why the heck were you playing Russell Westbrook so much? And why did you start treating Russell Westbrook like a star player?
The star treatment, for sure. Because, yeah, you can say what you want about overleaning and overextending on him. Jokic was a big fan of Russ, and I think was instrumental in trying to bring him in. But it's the star treatment and kind of putting him above others who had been forged in the fire as a part of that championship core that I think was a misstep. But we don't have videos circulating 2 years later of Michael Malone embarrassing himself the way that Calvin Booth getting fleeced by the Phoenix Suns on draft day and all of that. So I agree with you. I think ultimately I side more with Michael Malone's viewpoint and his side of things because of the track record of success and what he was able to accomplish than Calvin Booth.
Right. We're looking at 2 guys, by the way. Calvin Booth, I'm not sure he's ever going to get a GM job again based on what happened, but that could be said for Michael Malone too. He says in this quote that he wants to coach again, Richie, and I know it's something you're going to touch on, but he has to go to TV and say not much if he is going to coach again. Most of these guys that go to TV for a year don't say much because they don't want to, say anything negative about people they might be working with in the future. Michael Malone, don't say much challenge. That's a hard challenge for Michael Malone.
Yes.
Because
historically speaking, not his strong suit. Yeah.
Yes, he is interesting. He says things. It makes him a really great character and someone I really enjoyed covering. That's not going to go well on TV if he's trying to get back into coaching, but it might make him an incredible TV analyst. Like Stan Van Gundy. I don't know. I'm confusing names this morning. Stan Van Gundy and Jeff Van Gundy are two of the best TV basketball analysts we have seen. Michael Malone is cut from the Van Gundy tree. Yep. And Stan has not gone back into coaching, at least this most recent time, and he says the most things. So is Michael Malone going to follow in those footsteps where it's like, all right, this guy's kind of wanting to coach. We get the hint. But is he actually better for TV? Is he going to fall in love with TV? I'm not sure. We're going to see. So I would love to see Michael Malone behind a bench again. I really wanted him to get the Knicks job because I thought that would
I know. It just seemed like it was written in the stars.
Yeah. But between the buyout and the change that they went from Thibodeau, it wouldn't make much sense to go from Thibodeau to Malone. Thibodeau to Mike Brown makes a lot more sense. So the one I'm always going to be looking at with Michael Malone is where does LeBron end up after this season? Because Michael Malone and LeBron's ties are pretty heavy. I think the thing that Michael Malone did to the Los Angeles Lakers will always live in the back of the Lakers' mind of, hey, we could hire this guy as a coach. So if they ever were to move on from JJ Redick, I would look at Malone as one of the top names upon their leaderboard. So those are the things that I kind of look at, farther out. But there's always going to be a team that pops up that says, oh, this is a guy who won a championship with the best player in the world a couple of years ago. Why not bring him in here? Like, let's say the Wolves fall short again. Are they not going to have some sort of coaching, change this year? I know that Chris Finch is a Michael Malone guy, so that's kind of weird going from Finch to Malone, but there's always going to be openings, and Michael Malone's name's always going to be out there because of it. And personally, I'd much rather have Michael Malone than Mike Budenholzer or some of these more frequent coaches that are guys that have won a title recently and come up all the time.
Jake, when you're looking at all of the new faces on this Nuggets roster, from Cam Johnson, who comes over in the Michael Porter Jr. trade, from Brooklyn, you've got Jonas Valanciunas and all the drama that seems to have kind of subsided, at least for now, with his acquisition, bringing back Bruce Brown, the folklore hero, the fan favorite from the title team, and Tim Hardaway Jr. Which of these pieces, obviously a guy like Cam Johnson's going to have more opportunity for impact than maybe some of the other rotational players because he's going to be injected into the starting lineup. But which of those pieces do you think intrigues you the most about what they can bring to the Nuggets in 2025?
Johnson is the best player of that group by far. Like, it's not even close.
Mm-hmm.
Johnson is going to do a lot of the things Michael Porter Jr. did, except with 2 inches less of size and more mobile, and he's got more ball skills and more playmaking abilities. So what they can do with Cam Johnson and his ball creation skills and his playmaking and his play skills is going to be very interesting to me because the Nuggets badly needed a wing creator. Like, they just did not have enough between the gap of Jamal Murray to Aaron Gordon and Nikola Jokic of creation. So that's going to be fascinating. It will allow them to stagger their lineups in a way that actually makes sense, because whenever they staggered last year or the last 2 years, it would be like, all right, you're either giving Nikola Jokic a JV squad or you're leaving the stagger lineup with Jamal Murray or Michael Porter Jr. with like no one that can actually play basketball at the NBA level. Like, it was really, really bad. So Johnson is that guy. But to answer your question, it's Jonas Valanciunas. Because Jonas Valanciunas is the best backup center the Denver Nuggets have had since Nikola Jokic was the backup center of the Denver Nuggets for Yusuf Nurkic. And the Nuggets have not had the ability to actually take a load off Nikola Jokic, not play him for, half a quarter without panicking, not playing for an entire night without panicking, except for that one glorious DeAndre Jordan game that we got the last couple of years. Never forget. So those things that the Nuggets can do, and even at times, especially in the West that continues to go bigger, play perhaps two bigs at once. That might be a really interesting dynamic for David Adelman. So the thing with Jonas Valanciunas, as we talk about different, and that's the theme for this episode, is David Adelman and Jonas Valanciunas offer the Nuggets something different than they've had before. Cam Johnson offers them a tweak on what they've had before. I'm interested, at least in the first 82 games, of different. What different dynamics can the Denver Nuggets add to this core that we know is so successful? Because they're going to need a couple more ingredients if they are to beat Oklahoma City in the playoffs. So they're going to need to discover some things, and Jonas Valanciunas offers them the ability to discover some of those things.
I co-sign a lot of things that you said there on Cam Johnson. I think that the frustrating thing that came with Michael Porter Jr. in that experience was that it was so boom or bust, and it started to bust a lot more than you were able to get any kind of boom on a consistent basis. I think Cam Johnson offers you a higher floor, not just from a scoring perspective, but from an all-around perspective. I like the ball movement point that you made. I think that with Michael Porter Jr. was so often the end of the line, the ball stopped moving once it hit MPJ's hands, whereas I think the offense is going to be able to more cleanly flow through Cam Johnson.
Yeah,
And
Johnson led the Nets in assists last year.
Yeah. So I think that'll be big. And then from a 3-point, volume shooting perspective, I think he's at minimum a break even, net difference between him and MPJ. And I also think that, the MPJ experience had just kind of soured a little bit. It was getting tough probably internally within that locker room. And I'm sure there were coaching frustrations. I know we in the media and certainly in the fan base, there was a lot of just kind of like pinching your forehead of like, what are we doing here? The Jonas Valanciunas thing, the way that you laid it out, that you're probably right. I was going through it in my head as you said it, of like, who is a better backup center than Valanciunas for the Nuggets since it was Jokic, and they're really and that's more of a testament to the fact that they just haven't been able to solidify that role in any way.
They've had talent there. Like Mason Plumlee is a really talented NBA player. Isaiah Hartenstein has turned into one of the better centers in the league. JaVale McGee multiple times, right? Like he is a champion. He was an Olympian. Like they've had talent in that spot, which gives me some pause about how this will work out because Jonas Valanciunas is truly so talented. He's more talented than any of the guys I just mentioned. He was a top 5 NBA draft pick. Like he has had a long career of a lot of success. He can do just about everything on a basketball court, including shoot, which he hasn't done the last year or two because he hasn't been asked to do. He throws passes magnificently well. And by the way, he's one of the best rebounders in the NBA. And this is coming off your bench. So the Nuggets have had talent in that spot. They haven't had talent to this level. So my question is, how does it actually mesh or how does it get messed up?
And I think that there's really multiple prongs that this Jonas Valanciunas experiment can kind of take, multiple paths that it can take that I think will be a net positive in potentially a significant and immediate fashion for the Nuggets. One, the concept of surviving the non-Jokic minutes, which has been, especially in the last half decade or so, really the common Achilles heel for this Denver team. Even if you're just looking at Jonas Valanciunas being able to spell Jokic and prevent the point differential from just completely ballooning out of control is one thing. And a more rested Jokic in the fourth quarter, or being able to give him more minutes to breathe and be able to space out his minutes on the court better is one thing. But the prospect of playing him alongside Jokic, I think is interesting because it gives you a different look and it forces you defensively to have to approach it differently with that kind of size and scoring ability. But I also think it gives you the opportunity to potentially use the same strategy you would use with Jokic on Aaron Gordon, who is an aging player that has struggled with injuries. And if Jonas Valanciunas can be a split valve backup big who can spell Aaron Gordon and be able to run alongside Jokic as a recipient and replace Jokic as a direct swap on the 5, I think has a massive ability to give this Nuggets offense and David Adelman a bunch of different looks and options with rest for 2 players that clearly need it.
So this is a very simplistic look, but let's say Cam Johnson is a net pot, like just a net same as Michael Porter Jr. across the board for what the Nuggets can do. The Nuggets already beat the Thunder. The starting 5 already beat the Thunder in that series. The Nuggets outplayed the Thunder. So what were the problems? The bench minutes.
Yes.
Okay, so go out and improve the bench. Jonas Valanciunas is that guy that can, maybe he's going to be a net negative all year. Like it's going to be, the Nuggets are outscored by the bench. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Nuggets bench is still somewhat a disaster.
Yeah.
If you look at the end of the first quarter in that game 7, it goes from being the Nuggets leading to the Nuggets trailing in the span of like 3 minutes. And that's what I'm talking about. It's that disastrous, like 15-point swing that we've gotten accustomed to with the bench. So Valanciunas being able to stopgap that. And you mentioned the other problem in that Thunder series, which is that Aaron Gordon gets hurt. Okay, now we're going to be able to save Aaron Gordon's legs throughout the course of the season because Jonas Valanciunas can back up both of these guys throughout the course of the season and save their legs. So all of a sudden, Nikola Jokic's historic 3-point shooting season doesn't dip towards the end because his legs aren't beat to heck. like Jonas Valanciunas is going to take some of those minutes off the legs. So the thing the bench does is not only during the game itself does it offer the Nuggets more of a buoy and a life raft to stay afloat, but it's going to give these guys better performance throughout the course of the regular season and into the playoffs because less tasking is going to be done of these guys. So that's so important, and it's something that's not getting talked about. And I'm so excited, and it's not going to happen often. But when Jonas and Nikola are out there at the exact same time against Steven Adams and Alpi Sengun of the Rockets, that is going to be a very fun matchup to watch when we're just going old school NBA triangles with 4 guys in the paint just duking it out.
The last thing I'll say on Jonas Valanciunas, because you talked about narratives and things that are maybe getting overly talked about or under talked about. I think the way that the Jonas Valanciunas trade unfolded with this apprehension, and then it was the temptation of Panathinaikos in Greece, and I have angry people, in the Mediterranean in my mentions and in the station's mentions talking about how he's theirs and screw you and screw Denver and all that stuff. I think it left kind of a weird vibe for certain people in the community, in the fan base and in the community around Jonas. And I just want to make sure, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it, that I say this. I think that Jonas Valanciunas and the way that all went down got a little bit miscast as somebody whose heart and head isn't totally in it. And I understand. And I actually went down a little bit of a wormhole with some Greek basketball reporters and things overseas, doing podcast breakdowns and things like that. There are obvious factors that are reasonably pushing or pulling him in that direction. He's a couple hour flight from his family if he plays in Greece, and he's got developmental aged kids and all of those things. And he can be an all-star starter, high caliber player for Panathinaikos, which is loaded with former NBA talent, versus maybe being a bench player and a role player here in the NBA. But this is a guy that is supremely competitive, in my opinion, and is not somebody that I think, even at this later stage in his career, which took a massive swirl into a whirlpool after leaving a title contending Toronto team and then just getting tossed aside from Sacramento to Washington to New Orleans and all these losing franchises that maybe soured some of his perception and made him want to look overseas. But I just think that I think the way that all this went down made a lot of people eyebrow raisy or leery about Jonas Valanciunas, but I 100% believe him when he came out and said that I'm with Denver this year and they're going to get my all. Jake, is that how you read it?
Offseason's a time for negotiation. So I don't think that this affects the locker room at all. I don't think this bothers anyone at all. This is a guy who's been a starter his entire NBA career until the second half of last season when he was traded to Sacramento. And all of a sudden he turns into a bench player. So he probably wasn't that thrilled about that. And he's trying to come to terms with accepting his role as a former top pick and as a guy who started almost 1,000 NBA games. That is understandable. And by the way, if he went over to Greece, he may not have even started because they've got a guy named Lasorte, who's the starting center of the French team on that team. And they just won Eurobasket 2 years ago and were in the Final Four this year. So he was going to be competing for that job as well. He's just at the point in his career where he's not a guaranteed starter anymore here or in Greece at the top level basketball there. So he is adjusting to his new role. And it's completely understandable how he signs a 3-year, $30 million contract in Washington, gets shipped out to Sacramento, and now all of a sudden is a Denver Nugget, how he might be like, well, I don't control anything about my life. I'm not really happy about this. I get all of that. As long as he comes in on Monday and he is for the rest of the season committed, all of this to me is just water under the bridge. None of it really matters. And I don't even think it really should be brought up again unless he brings it up himself after Monday, after he is committed to the Denver Nuggets. So I don't care about really any of this with Jonas Valanciunas. I'm really excited to see him in a Denver Nuggets basketball uniform because he is a really talented dude. And him bringing the vibes with Bruce Brown and what Tim Hardaway Jr. has offered throughout the course of his career is a very smart player. And as the son of a former Denver Nugget, these are really interesting guys that the Denver Nuggets have brought in that should add a lot to what they struggled with while at the same time strengthening their strengths. And that's something that I think is really important and overlooked in sports. We're always talking about making sure you're better at the things you're worse at. Well, I think it's important to strengthen your strengths. And Jonas Valanciunas, Cam Johnson, Bruce Brown, and Tim Hardaway Jr. all do that in some sort of way.
Yeah, I think Tim Hardaway Jr. could be something that 30, 40 games into the season, we are looking back and going, you know what? We didn't maybe talk about that acquisition as much as we could have. I think that is a sneaky acquisition for basically nothing that this front office made to bring in a veteran presence off the bench, somebody who can bring 3-point shooting and a leadership quality to this locker room that sometimes it feels like they've been lacking or missing. And I just think that one kind of goes under the radar because you have Bruce Brown coming back and it doesn't have the star power of the Cam Johnson move or even the Jonas Valanciunas acquisition. But I really, really like the decision to bring in a Tim Hardaway Jr., and I'm very excited to see what he will ultimately bring to the rotation.
He just gives the Nuggets something different. They've only had this a couple times in the Jokic era, Bones Highland being one of those guys that can just come off the bench and score points. They just have had very few of those guys historically. Bruce Brown is one of them too, by the way, who can just come off the bench and score points. They've got 2 of them this year. They've never had 2 of them at the exact same time. And Valanciunas could also be categorized as that, but he's not a guard, so it's a little bit different, right? So those guys give the Nuggets something different to do. And that's what I keep trying to say is like, we're going to see a different version of the Denver Nuggets than we have seen over the last 5 to 6 years. And is that going to be better or worse? I'm not sure. I lean towards it being better because of the coaching staff seems pretty strong, because of on paper, this roster seems a lot better, because they actually have some depth in case someone goes down with an injury. And by the way, Tim Hardaway Jr. by the end of the year, who I think is a very good NBA player, might get outplayed by Julian Strawther, who every time Julian Strawther is healthy, finds his way onto the court and continues to play because he's a really good player. So we're looking at a situation with Payton Watson, who was the 7th player on last year's team, is going to struggle to get into the top 10 in the rotation this year. And that's a really good place for the Denver Nuggets to be. It's going to inspire Payton Watson to try even harder on his game, which I know he works very hard on his game. That's not a slight on Payton Watson, but it's going to make him more hungry. It's going to get guys more hungry because this roster is a lot more talented than before. And Richie, by the way, they have 1 roster spot open still and some cap space to work with if they want to do it under the second apron. So they still have an ability to add a player that can help their team throughout the course of the season. Whether they do that tomorrow or February, I'm not sure. They're probably going to wait out till the January or February to see how the season's going because things are so different in Denver. They're not even sure what they need exactly right now. And that's a really interesting spot to be in.
Couple of quick hitters here before we transition to maybe talking about the Western Conference from a macro perspective with some breaking news in the NBA this week. Bruce Brown, obviously coming back. I think that everybody has fond and vivid memories of his original time here in Denver during the title run year. That was one of the feathers in the cap of Calvin Booth to bring in a guy like Bruce Brown and a guy like KCP to help them finally get over that hump. But Jake, when you're looking at this 2025 Nuggets roster, the way that it's comprised with David Adelman at the helm and all these new pieces that are brought in compared to what we saw in the 2023 season when they won the title, how different, if at all, do you envision Bruce Brown's role and impact to be now compared to what it was the title year?
I envision it to be pretty different because the dynamics of the team are a lot different.
I agree.
If you even think about it in this scenario, just look at Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon, when the Denver Nuggets won a title, was kind of somewhere between a power forward and a small forward. And Michael Porter Jr. was somewhere between a small forward and a power forward. Those guys kind of combined played those positions together. Aaron Gordon is a power forward now, especially with, just aging a little bit, maybe losing a little bit of a step athletically. I don't think he's lost much of a step, obviously.
Doesn't look like it.
Given that tip dunk winner, but this is going to allow him to grow into that later on in his career, now just signing that extension. So Bruce Brown, who when he first played with the Denver Nuggets, played anywhere between the 1 and the 4, is most likely now going to play anywhere between the 1 and the 3. And I think that's going to allow him to focus more on his game. He's a guy at times in his career who's played more of a forward role than a point guard role. I think the Nuggets really want him to be a backup point guard. And that's what Bruce wants to be because that's what he was at the University of Miami. He loves being a point guard. He just hasn't really gotten that opportunity in the NBA outside of Denver. and his nomadic journey the last couple of years, he signs a giant deal with the Indiana Pacers, who he thinks he's going to compete with for championships. Literally, they've gone to the Eastern Conference Finals 2 years in a row. Bruce gets traded in the middle of one season to one team that's lifeless, and then the next season he goes from one lifeless team to another in New Orleans. So I don't really put a lot of stock into the way Bruce Brown has played the last couple of years and his shooting percentages. I go back to the chemistry with Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray he had. I expect him to probably play a little bit less minutes overall than he played his first time in Denver, just because Christian Brown has turned himself into a legitimate starting NBA player. And, KCP was that before, but they've got all these guys they got to work into the rotation now. Whereas before it was like, all right, let's just turn the keys over to Bruce because we've got nothing else going on. So I think Bruce is going to play a little bit less. I think his impact's probably going to be a little bit less than it was the first time here, but he is a guy that has a dogged mentality. And that's something the Nuggets need out on the perimeter, because they do not have much perimeter defense. And that's one of the secrets about this team. Christian Brown's their best perimeter defender. They don't really have a second best perimeter defender. So can Brown and Brown be the law firm again of defense? That's something that's key. Can Bruce Brown in this case, take some of that pressure away from Jamal Murray and be a legitimate backup point guard? I think he played 81 or 82 games his first stint in Denver. So it was really important, the amount Bruce Brown played and the different things he did and the versatility he had. I don't think he's going to be as versatile. I think his role is going to be a little bit more defined, but that might make him able to expand his game in ways this year that he didn't the first time around. One of the things he said his first time around is he knew he was going to do more playmaking, and he knew he was going to have more catch and shoot threes. So those were things he really focused on that offseason. When I talked to him on Monday, I'm going to be really interested to see what he thinks his role is going to be and what he worked on in his game this offseason, because I know he's been working his butt off, because that's the guy he is.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. His, especially defensively, his like gritty mentality and just bringing that energy and that presence out on the perimeter is something that has been sorely missed and hopefully can return in 2025. But you mentioned the other half of the law firm there in Christian Brown, and that was the last question on this roster that I had for you, specifically looking at the Nuggets, is now that Christian Brown has blossomed into a legitimate NBA player, and with his contract status and situation where it's at, and the decisions that may have to be made in the very near future surrounding Christian Brown, where do you think the Nuggets currently stand in that regard? And how does Christian Brown's current status and pending decision impact the sense of urgency to return to an NBA Finals and potentially bring another championship back to Denver with this group they have now?
Well, there's three ways this can go, Richie, just from a player standpoint of like what Christian Brown is, because I don't think we really even know. One, Christian Brown could take another step this year. I'm not sure that he is, but he could take another step this year. And if he does, he's an all-star, like legitimately, like he would be an all-star. Two, he can stay the same player he is, which is a really good starting player in the NBA, probably, the 10th best shooting guard or 12th best shooting guard in the NBA. Third, he can go back to a version of himself that is somewhere between last year and the year before. And we'll see, because he scored a lot in transition last year. And I know for a fact, based off what David Adelman said, the Nuggets are going to do less running this year. They're not going to run as much. So will that affect Christian Brown's game? Will he be able to find different ways to score that's not in transition? Can he shoot more? He shot some of the fewest threes for shooting guards in the league last year. So he needs to shoot more. So there's a couple different things that can happen here with Christian Brown. And the impending decision you talk about, Christian Brown is extension eligible as of right now until the season starts, basically. I don't expect the Nuggets to give Christian Brown an extension, which means next year at the end of the year, rolling into next offseason, he will be a restricted free agent. This year, restricted free agency in the NBA has led to this insane situation with Jonathan Kuminga in Golden State. It's also led to Cam Thomas signing the qualifying offer in Brooklyn. And I think one more player signed the qualifying offer in whatever team he was playing for. And then Josh Giddey just signed a 4-year, $120 million extension. Or maybe it was $100 million extension. It was about $25 million a year, which sounds like a lot, but it's honestly less than what Josh Giddey probably should have gotten, because I think Josh Giddey's a better player than Christian Brown. So the extension talk with Christian Brown entering this offseason was he was going to get an extension around 28 to 30 million. There's a little bit more cap room in the NBA to go around next season to give someone a qualifying offer if someone wanted to come in and give Christian Brown a restricted free agency offer and say, Nuggets, go match this. We'll see if you can do it. I kind of think that the Nuggets are playing this the smart way, because I don't think Christian Brown's a $28 million player in the market where Josh Giddey's getting 25. I think Christian Brown is still somewhere between 23 and 26. And the Nuggets playing this out, there is the risk that he turns into an all-star and all of a sudden you can't afford him. But if he does, you could trade him next offseason as a restricted free agent if you have to. So the Nuggets are doing the smart thing here and letting this play out, especially with what just happened this summer in restricted free agency, seeing how that goes next summer and delaying the decision a year, because paying a guy off of 1 year's performance, as we saw with Michael Porter Jr., can get you into a pretty big pickle. So we'll see. It's going to be kind of a year of being on edge with Christian Brown. But if there's anything I learned, and this is something that I saw in the playoffs last year, is I go up to our Anilo Pirro of Denver Sports, and I say, on the Mile High Hoops podcast, before Game 7, I say, AP, this is a Christian Brown legacy game. He is either going to define his time with the Nuggets and become a part of this core, or he is going to slip back into an earlier version of himself and be a tradable piece this offseason. What did he do in that Game 7 against the Clippers? He was one of the best players on the floor in that game. Yep. And he shut down James Harden. And I know people make fun of James Harden in Game 7s, but it wasn't like James Harden was playing against nobody out there. He was playing against Christian Brown. Christian Brown helped force those horrible decisions from Harden. So Christian Brown became that guy in that game. And no one's talking about trading Christian Brown this offseason because he's a part of this core now. Can Christian Brown solidify that this season? That's the big question, and turn himself into a guy that the Nuggets need to pay. If Christian Brown turns into one of those guys, the Nuggets are going to find a way to make it work. I think they are going to find a way to make it work with Christian, Jamal, Nikola, and Aaron being their 4 players that they pay. It's really hard to pay 4 players now in the NBA. You really can only pay 2. They're going to be paying 4, but they're going to find a way to make it work, especially with guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. and Bruce Brown, who just took minimum deals to come play here. That's proof that they can still get guys to come play here that are pretty talented.
Speaking of finding ways to make it work, I would imagine, Jake, that is what the messaging is down in Houston over at the Rockets facility, as they have now learned that Fred VanVleet has torn his ACL and kind of turns a situation where the Rockets, who traded for Kevin Durant without feeling like they had to give up any of their major players in their starting rotation that they wanted to keep, they now lose one before the season even gets going. And it feels like, Jake, that a singular injury like this to a team in Houston who was the number 2 seed last year and got upset by the Golden State Warriors already kind of shifts the balance of power in the Western Conference in a way that benefits the Denver Nuggets. Would you agree?
Yeah, outside of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander getting hurt, and we don't want anyone to get hurt,
No.
This was the biggest injury that could have happened for the Nuggets title hopes, basically. And it's funny, you say they didn't trade anything from their rotation, and I agree with you, they got a lot better. And it's the narrative going around, but they traded their leading scorer, Jalen Green, and their leading three-point shooter, Dylan Brooks, who defined their culture, to the Suns in that trade.
No,
they gave up pieces in that trade, they just didn't give up a lot of draft capital. I also thought the Rockets were going to be a lot better. I thought there were 3 teams in the West that were capable of winning a title this year: the Thunder, the Nuggets, and the Rockets. The Rockets are no longer capable. The Rockets, without Fred VanVleet on the floor last year, with Jalen Green, who's a pretty good ball handler, they don't have him anymore, were literally a non-functional offense. They had a month stretch with Fred VanVleet that went down, I think in like February, and they went like 1-9 in that stretch. They could not play without Fred VanVleet last year. He was one of the most important players in the NBA. And I'm not even saying Fred VanVleet's like this awesome NBA player. They just simply don't have another point guard. Aaron Holiday and Reed Shepherd are their options. Reed Shepherd was the 3rd overall pick in the draft. He's played almost nothing in the NBA. Aaron Holiday has been a really good 3rd string and backup point guard throughout the course of his career. He's not starting for a championship caliber team. So already the Rockets, who have a lot of assets, but only are $1.2 million under the second cap that they're second apron that they're hard capped at, are going to have to consider making a giant panic trade either into the season or on the heels of the season right now. Because when you've got 38-year-old Kevin Durant, I think he's 38, you are in title mode now. And the way Alpi Sengun looked in Eurobasket, he looks like a legitimate star in the NBA. So they've got to go right now. And that team is really good, Richie. Like, I can't even tell you. Amen Thompson's going to be one of the best players in the NBA. They roll deep with Tari Eason and Jabari Smith coming off the bench, most likely. Dorian Finney-Smith they picked up this offseason, who's such a good NBA player. So they have such a good team. They literally just needed a guy like Fred VanVleet, a capable NBA point guard, and they are a title contender. They don't have that now, and now they slip back to the pack, and they open the door for teams like the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Timberwolves, who I think are a little bit behind the Nuggets and the Thunder.
So you think this now pretty firmly puts, post VanVleet injury, you think this kind of puts the Nuggets in that 2 seed potentially, and with the potential to maybe overtake the Thunder for the number 1 seed in the Western Conference? Or is there still too big of a gap there based on what you saw during the regular season last year for that to happen?
This is a stat I will repeat over and over and over again.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
No reigning champion has gotten past the second round since the Steph Curry Golden State Warriors back in 2018, 2019. All of them have failed. The Denver Nuggets, the Boston Celtics, the Los Angeles Lakers, the Milwaukee Bucks. Phoenix Suns even did it, and they didn't even win a title, right? Like, they've never gotten back there. It's really hard to do it twice in a row, as we saw with the Nuggets very recently. The thing with the Thunder is they're a lot younger, and they're a lot deeper than these recent champions. So they've got guys coming off their bench who literally did not play last year and are trying to prove something. So if Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, instead of playing 75 games, plays 65 games, yeah, it's going to affect them. He was the MVP last year, but it might not affect them as much as going from him to some scrub. They're going to go from him to a guy who's hungry and talented. So I think the Thunder are going to be really hard to beat still in the regular season because they are so deep and they are going to be trying all sorts of different things, and they've got guys with things to prove. But I do think the Denver Nuggets got significantly better as a postseason team, and they've alleviated, to me, what was the biggest problem the last 2 playoff sessions, which was they had struggle breaking ball pressure. Like, Jamal Murray had to break ball pressure by himself. Aaron Gordon was a guy they used to break ball pressure. He got hurt because of it. Literally, that's what happened in Game 6. So now they can have Bruce Brown do some of that. They can have Cam Johnson do some of that. They still are going to struggle perimeter defense a little bit. And one thing that got completely overlooked in the Oklahoma City series, by the way, is Michael Porter Jr. did an incredible job defending Shai Gilgeous-Alexander at times when he got switched on to him. So can the Nuggets' weakest link on defense, which I'm not sure who it is yet, maybe it's Cam Johnson, who has gotten Defensive Player of the Year votes in the past, can he defend Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? Can they defend Jalen Williams, who now has the confidence because he's done it in the NBA Finals, whereas before he was a very shaky playoff player? So I still think it's 1-2 with the Denver Nuggets. I think the Nuggets were like plus 750 when I looked last night to win the title. That's way too low. The Nuggets are way closer to the Thunder than they are to the Minnesota Timberwolves and that next class of teams. The only reason why they're that low, I think they're the second best team in the NBA is because they're in the same conference as the Thunder. So the Cavs are between the Nuggets and the Thunder, and the Cavs are going to be a really good team this year.
I love it. Jake, thank you so much for joining us. We will keep tabs on everything you've got going at DenverSports.com across all of the major sports and college sports here in town. And we will be sure to check in with you again, probably on Tuesday after Nuggets Media Day. Maybe we can debrief some of the things that you're able to dissect from that.
Richie, if we're talking Tuesday, something horrible went wrong in the Broncos game on Monday night.
That's true.
I'm going to just guess that based off our general nature here at Denver Sports.
Well, I guess we'll have to see how that primetime matchup with the Denver Broncos goes. But until next time, Jake, thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, buddy.
Appreciate it. To the rest of you out there, have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and we will catch you tomorrow at noon for the next Rundown. I do what I love what I do. It's second nature to put in the work.